Dobro jutro, everyone. Good morning. Let's start out by singing a good Hebrew song, shall we?
Da naučimo jednu jevrejsku pesmu.
And I think most of you know this song from previous class.
Znate ovu pesmu već? Naučili ste na prethodnim časima.
How many know this song?
Koliko od vas zna pesmu?
All right, wonderful. What psalm is this from? Do you remember?
Odakle ova pesma?
Psalm
133.
133. 133.
133. psalm.
And this is one of the 15 psalms
To je jedan od 15 psalama
that are called alamot,
koji se zovu alamot.
the psalms of going up.
Uzdizanja, dakle, psalmi penjanja, tako
And Jerusalem is not very high. It's only 3,000 feet high.
Dakle, Jerusalim nije tako visoko, negde oko 1000 metara nadmorske visine.
And Mount Hermon in the north is 9,000 feet high.
A i oko 3000 metara je Hermon, dakle na severu.
And yet, from Mount Hermon to Jerusalem, you go up, you don't go down.
A ipak, od Hermona prema Jerusalimu penjete se, ne idete na dole.
Because Jerusalem is the highest place on earth theologically.
Jer je Jerusalim najviše teološko mesto na svetu.
So even if you're on top of Mount Everest, you still go up to Jerusalem.
Čak i ako ste na vrhu Mont Everesta, ipak idete u Jerusalim, penjete se na gore.
And so these 15 Psalms, 120 to 134,
Tako da ovih 15 psalama od 120. do 134.
were sung by the pilgrims as they went up to Jerusalem.
su psalmi hodočašće kad su išli za Jerusalim.
So we've been up to, we're in Jerusalem still from the Feast of Tabernacles. We haven't gone home
Još uvijek smo u
yet.
Jerusalimu od praznika Senita, sećate se.
Psalms were also sung at the temple during the festivals
I ovi psalmi su pevani u hramu za vreme praznika.
and on the way home too.
I na putu kući isto.
What is the meaning?
Šta je značenje?
Hine matov. Behold, how good.
Dakle, gle kako je krasno, tamo piše.
Umanayim. And how pleasant, how wonderful.
Kako je krasno, kako je dobro i lepo.
Shevet. I noticed I have misspelled this here. This should be Shevet here. Same sound but different letter. Shevet, the ones who are dwelling.
Oni koji stanuju,
Achim, which is brothers and sisters.
braća i sestre, Ahim.
Gam Yakad is intense oneness or unity.
Dakle, u čvrstom jedinstvu. Jahad.
All right, let's sing together. Hine matovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Beautiful, beautiful. Only one problem.
Samo jedan problem ima.
It's too slow.
Presporo.
We sang it like a funeral dirge.
Kao da smo na sahrani.
Now we must sing it like a joyful song of Zion.
Sad moramo radosno.
Twice as fast.
Brže.
Hine matovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Beautiful. All right. We need just one more thing with it here.
Još jedna stvar ima s ovim.
And that is, I need a volunteer to help me on one side, and I will lead the other side, and we will have a round. We'll sing it in a round.
Treba nam dobrovoljac na jednoj i drugoj strani, pa pevat ćemo prvu strofu. On će objasniti u stvari.
Someone
Da,
brave
kanonski.
enough here to volunteer?
Je li ima dobrovoljaca na jednoj i drugoj strani? Ko je singer? Ok, Marijana je ovde. A ovde? Lidija. Lidija i Marijana. Volunteers are Marijana and Lydia.
All right, good. Okay, so you want to start? And then I'll be over here with you, and you two over there, okay?
Okay. Hinema tovu manaim shevetachim gam yachad.
Hinenatonu manaim shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematom shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematom shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematonu manaim shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematonu manaim shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematom shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematom shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematom manaim shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematom manaim shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematom shevetachim gam yachad. Hinematom shevetachim gam yachad.
Hi. All right, great. Thank you very much. Lydia and
Marijana.
Mariana. Okay, thank you very much. Mariana. Okay. Marianne. And an old song. Down by the seaside, sifting sand. Marianne. It was
Znate za tu pesmu? Oh, she says we have the better in Serbian.
Yes, about Marianne?
Yes. Gde je ovaj tehničar? Moj glas se umorio, dakle mi smo juče ceo dan, od 9 do 7 uveče. Ja pričam za njegov glas, a i moj nije nešto baš.
He worked very hard yesterday, so
Dakle, zajedno smo radili baš vredno.
do we have a volunteer who will lead us in prayer today as we begin?
Da li imamo
that's better.
dobrovoljca za molitvu? Koji će?
We had two ladies volunteer for the
Imali smo dve dame
Singing, so
dobrovoljce za
maybe-
pevanje, sad
maybe a
možda jednog
a couple of guys that will volunteer to pray. Maybe
dvojica
two.
mladića za molitvu. Okay,
One.
Žarko?
What is your name?
Žarko.
Jack? Jacques. Jacques. Jacques, okay. All right, Jack.
Good.
We have Lydia and Marianne and Jack. All right.
It's good to have two names. Dobro je imati dva imena.
And one other guy.
Bojan se javio? Bojan.
And your name again?
Bojan.
Bojan, yes.
Bojan.
Bojan. Okay. All right, let's stand together as we
Ustaćemo
pray.
da se molim.
As you will notice very quickly, I'm not an artist,
Kao što ste brzo primetili, nisam baš umetnik.
but this is this is a little diagram that illustrates the sanctuary doctrine.
Dakle, ovaj dijagram ilustruje u stvari celu doktrinu o svetinji. Gore je svetinja.
And its two basic pillars. Here are the
Ima
pillars that hold
Dva
up the
osnovna
doctrine.
stuba ima ta doktrina.
And the one pillar is typology.
Jedan stub je tipologija,
The other pillar is prophecy.
a drugi je proroštvo.
And of course, the foundation of the doctrine is Christ, Jesus Christ.
Naravno, temelj je Hristos.
Yesterday, Sunday, we looked at the different issues that have arisen in the controversy over the sanctuary doctrine.
Dakle, u nedelju smo učili o tim problemima koji su se javili u doktrini o svetinji.
And these various issues relate to these two pillars of the doctrine.
U stvari, ti problemi su u odnosu na ova dva stuba.
The first pillar is the pillar of typology.
Prvi stub je tipologija, dakle.
And this is the pillar we will spend most of the time looking at here today.
Danas ćemo uglavnom provesti istraživajući taj stub.
This was the pillar that led the early Adventist pioneers to understand the basics of the sanctuary dynamics.
To je stup koji je poveo pionire adventizma da razumeju osnove dinamike svetinje.
As they looked at the earthly sanctuary, they saw the holy place ministry that happened most of the year.
Dakle, dok su gledali u zemaljsku svetinju, videli su svetinju gde je tokom godine bila služba.
And then at the end of the year, the priest went to do a special work in the most holy place.
A na kraju godine, dakle, sveštenik je ulazio u svetinju nad svetinjom, specijalna služba.
And if this was true in the earthly sanctuary,
I ako je to bilo tako u zemaljskoj,
and if the earthly sanctuary is a copy of the heavenly
ako je
sanctuary,
zemaljska kopija nebeske,
then we should expect that this will be what will happen in the basic contours of the heavenly.
onda možemo to očekivati u onim osnovnim konturama događanja i u nebeskoj.
The only question was, when would that cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary take place?
Osnovno pitanje je kad se dogodilo čišćenje te nebeske svetinje.
Sometime at the end of history, like it happened at the end of the year.
Kao što je u zemaljskoj bilo pri kraju godine, tako je u nebeskoj pri kraju zemaljske istorije.
The typology doesn't answer exactly when.
Tipologija ne odgovara na pitanje kada.
For this, they went to the prophecy of
Za to se ide u proroštvo.
the 2300 days in Daniel
2300
8:14.
dana i noći, Danilo 8:14.
So the two of them together, the typology and the prophecy, provided the foundation for the basic picture of the sanctuary message.
Znači, zajedno tipologija i proroštvo omogućuju nam da razumemo temelje poruke o svetinji.
Now, in 1980, the ones who were attacking the sanctuary doctrine
1980. oni koji su napadali doktrinu o svetinji
said these pillars are faulty. They're shaky pillars.
rekli su da se oba ova stuba u stvari drmaju.
Cannot use typology to argue from the earthly sanctuary to the heavenly sanctuary.
Rekli su ne možemo mi koristiti tipologiju da razmišljamo od zemaljske prema nebeskoj.
The typology is not predictive. It does not point forward to what was going to happen in the
Tipologija
future.
nema proročki element, ona ne ukazuje na nešto u budućnosti.
It's only retrospective. It only looks backward after the fact.
Ona je retrospektivna, ona gleda unazad nakon činjenice koja se
What was their
dogodi.
proof for that?
Da li su bili ispravni? Koji je bio dokaz za to?
The book of Hebrews.
Jevrejima poslanice.
As these expositors explained the book of Hebrews,
Dok su ovi interpretatori objašnjavali Jevrejima poslanicu,
they tried to show that Hebrews changes the typology of Leviticus.
pokušavali su da objasne da je Jevrejima poslanica u stvari promenila tipologiju Starog zaveta.
And so one cannot move from Leviticus to Hebrews, but one has to go back from Hebrews to Leviticus.
Ne može se zaključivati od 3. Mojsije ka Jevrejima, nego se mora ići unazad, od Jevrejima ka 3. Mojsije.
That Hebrews is the inspired reinterpretation of the Leviticus types.
A Jevrejima je u stvari nadahnuta reinterpretacija 3. Mojsije.
I still remember the day that I was just about to finish my doctoral studies there at Andrews.
Još uvijek se sećam dana, to je bilo neposredno pred završetak mojih doktorskih studija na Andrewsu.
And one of my fellow doctoral students was teaching in the college at that time.
A jedan od mojih kolega na doktorskim studijama, on je već predavao na koledžu u to vreme.
And he had been studying the writings of Desmond Ford and Robert Brinsmead and had become convinced that they were right.
A on je čitao Forda i Brinsmitha i već je došao do zaključka da je to tačno.
And so he requested to give a presentation to the doctoral club, those of us who were doctoral students.
I on je želeo da ima predavanje u klubu doktorskih studenata koji je tad bio na Andrewsu.
Now that room was only about half as big as this room here.
Dakle, ta soba je otprilike polovina ove prostorije.
And we usually had about 25 or 30 doctoral students that came to these weekly meetings.
Obično su dolazili doktorski studenti, njih 25-30.
But when they heard that he was giving this presentation,
Ali kad su čuli da će imati predavanje,
the room was packed. We had probably 120
soba
people
je
there
bila
in that tiny room.
prepuna i bilo je 120 ljudi možda.
And his message was basically this:
A ovo je bila u stvari njegova poruka.
if you accept the book of Leviticus as your foundation for the sanctuary doctrine,
Ako prihvatite 3. Mojsiju kao temelj učenja o svetinji
and you argue consistently from Leviticus,
i jednostavno svi argumenti konzistentno idu iz 3. Mojsijeve,
you will be an Adventist.
bit ćete adventista.
But he said, I am a New Testament Christian,
Ali on je rekao, ja sam novozavetni hrišćanin,
and I believe in the book of Hebrews.
a ja verujem u knjigu Jevrejima poslanicu.
And Hebrews has changed and twisted and altered the typology of Leviticus.
A Jevrejima je knjiga koja je promenila, dakle, tipologiju 3. Mojsijeve.
And so I must believe the sanctuary doctrine as Hebrews teaches it.
Tako da ja moram da verujem učenju o svetinji onako kako Jevrejima poslanica to uči.
He said, unfortunately, Ellen White follows the Leviticus model
I onda je rekao, nažalost, Ellen White prati model 3. Mojsije,
and not the Hebrews model.
a ne Jevrejima poslanica.
And so I have to reject her too.
Tako da moram i nju da odbacim.
And that was his last presentation at Andrews.
To je bilo njegovo posljednje predavanje na Andrewsu.
He left ministry and left his teaching, and
Napustio je službu i profesorsku katedru
it caused me to think very seriously.
i prodrmalo da razmišljam ozbiljno.
What is the nature of typology?
Koja je priroda tipologije?
Is typology only something that looks backward from the perspective of Hebrews back into the Old Testament?
Da li je tipologija nešto što gleda samo unazad, od Jevrejima poslanice u prošlost?
Or is it something that God has divinely designed to teach us already in the Old Testament the basics of the new?
Ili je Bog zamislio kao dizajner da već u Starom Zavetu postoji nešto što će nas naučiti o novom?
Is Hebrews and Leviticus in contradiction?
Da li uopšte postoji protivorečnost između 3. Mojsijeve i Jevrejima poslanica?
Or perhaps is the problem in the mind of the interpreter rather than in the Bible itself?
Ili je možda problem u umu tumača pre nego u samoj Bibliji?
Well, that started me wrestling, trying to grasp what is the nature of typology here.
To je uticalo na mene da sam se borio sa ovim, šta je priroda tipologije.
Now, actually, I had been wondering about this long before that.
Dakle, ja sam se puno borio sa ovim i ranije.
Even as a pastor, at one time I was quite skeptical of typology.
Čak i kao pastor jedno vreme bio sam baš sumnjičav što se tiče tipologije.
When I heard the word typology, I said, what? Typology?
Kad sam čuo reč tipologija, šta?
You mean
Tipologija?
that allegorical, fanciful reading back into the text, something that isn't there?
Mislite ono alegorijsko izmišljotine, dakle učitavate u tekst nešto što nema?
I don't want anything to do with that typology stuff.
Ne interesuje me baš ta tipologija.
That's the way I felt for several years, right after my seminary training.
Tako sam razmišljao odmah nakon završenog fakulteta, nekoliko godina.
I have to say that back when I went to the seminary in the dark ages,
U to vreme u mračno doba na seminaru kad sam išao,
our church was in a crisis in America. And we
crkva je
had
bila u krizi u Americi.
many teachers who had gotten their doctorate in a secular institution and had really lost their faith in Adventism.
Mnogi profesori su dobili doktorate na svetskim institucijama i izgubili su veru u adventizam.
I'm happy to tell you those teachers aren't teaching at our seminary now.
They are
They are not. They are not.
Good.
No.
Da, ti profesori danas ne predaju na sreću na seminaru.
But in those days, they planted doubts in the minds of the students, and I was one
Ali u to vreme oni su sejali sumnju u umove studenata.
who became quite a skeptic for maybe 5 or 6 years of my life.
Tako da sam bio i ja skeptik 5-6 godina.
But through a chain of providential leadings, God brought me back to a trust in His Word again.
Ali kroz proviđenje Bog me je vratio njegove reči ponovo.
And gave me an understanding of the gospel that I did not have before.
To je razumevanje evanđelja koje nisam imao ranije.
And I began to see that the gospel was there in the Old Testament, in those sacrifices and in the types of the sanctuary.
A video sam da je evanđelje u Starom Zavetu prisutno u tim tipovima u svetinji.
And I began to read everything I could find on the sanctuary.
I počeo sam da čitam sve što sam mogu da nađem u svetinji.
I read about 30 or 40 books on sanctuary typology.
Na tipologiju o svetinje pročitao sam 30-40 knjiga.
When I heard the word typology, I said, yes, give me more.
Kad sam čuo reč tipologija, da, još.
So I went from skepticism to the opposite extreme.
Od skepticizma na drugu krajinu sam otišao.
But then a problem arose.
Onda i pojavio se problem.
Because one book would say, well, this type means this, and this type means this.
Jedna knjiga bi rekla, ovaj tip predstavlja to.
And typology works like this.
Tipologija je to što predstavlja.
And I'd read the next book, and it would say typology works this way, and it would describe it in a different way.
A druga knjiga bi to opisala na neki drugi način. Rekla bi tipologija ide u ovom smeru.
So then came my third reaction to typology.
A onda je došla moja i treća reakcija na tipologiju.
What is typology?
Šta je tipologija? Šta je to?
And that eventually drove me back to the seminary to do my PhD.
To me u stvari i dovuklo nazad na seminar da uradim doktorat.
And in the very first class, my teacher was Dr. Hazel.
Prvi čas profesor je bio Hazel.
It was a class in hermeneutics, principles of interpretation.
To je bio predmet principi tumačenja Biblije.
And one of the topics we could choose on the list for writing our research paper was principles of biblical typology.
I jedna od tema na kojoj su mogli da pišemo rad bila je principi biblijske tipologije.
And I said, I want that one.
Ja sam rekao, ja hoću ovo.
And that led to 2 years of studying this subject in my doctoral dissertation.
I to me je dovelo i do doktorske disertacije, 2 godine proučavanja.
I had hoped that someone would have defined from the Bible what is the nature of typology.
Ja sam se ranije nadao da će neko definisati iz Biblije šta je tipologija.
But instead I found that everyone just assumed the definition without letting it come from the Bible.
Ali kasnije sam shvatio da oni samo podrazumevaju neku definiciju koja nije iz Biblije.
Some assumed that it was divinely designed predictive prefigurations of the antitype.
Neki su razmišljali da je tipologija, da su to proročki elementi koji unapred ukazuju na antitip.
Others assumed that it's simply the retrospective recognition of patterns in history, no prediction.
Drugi su verovali da je to retrospektivno podsjećanje na tipove u istoriji veza, dakle nema nikakvog proročkog elementa.
Sort of like, in fact, they used the example of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Koristili su model Napoleona Bonaparte.
You remember his reading about his battle of Waterloo?
Sećate se Waterloo, bitke Waterloo?
And in America, at least, when we have an examination that we don't do well on, we say, oh, I met my Waterloo today.
Dakle, u Americi kad ne uradim dobro ispit, kaže, danas sam bio na Waterloo.
Well, some people were saying in these books I was reading, this is typology.
Neki kažu, ovo je tipologija.
The Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon's battle, that's a type.
To je Napoleonova bitka Waterloo, to je tip.
And my examination is the antitype.
A moj ispit je antitip.
That's all there is to typology.
To je sve, to je tipologija.
Just similar situations.
Jednostavno slična situacija.
So what was the truth about typology?
Šta je u stvari istina o tipologiji?
And in particular, were our pioneers right when they used this pillar to interpret the sanctuary doctrine?
Specifično, da li su pioniri bili u pravu kad su tvrdili da je tipologija stup?
Or do we need to
Učini
crash
se.
this pillar away?
Ili mi treba da razbijemo ovaj stup, da ga
The
sklonimo?
whole doctrine of the sanctuary will come falling down.
Pašće cela istina o svetinji.
I was desperate to find the truth about that.
Očajno sam tragao za istinom o tome.
And for about 2 months, I tried to find a way to let the definition of typology come from within the Bible.
2 meseca sam tragao za definicijom tipologije iz Biblije.
It was harder than I thought.
Teže je bilo nego što sam mislio.
Because if I decide here is the definition of typology and then I go to the Bible to find it, I will bring my own definition to the Bible instead of letting the definition come from the Bible.
Ako ja imam već definiciju tipologije, namećem je Bibliji, onda ću je nametnuti Bibliji, ona neće proizaći iz Biblije.
But if I say, no, I will not decide in advance what typology is, I will let it come from the Bible.
Ali ako kažem sebi ne, unaprijed neću definisati šta je tipologija, dopustit ću Bibliji da govori.
So I take my Bible and I
Uzeo sam
open
svoju
it
Bibliju, otvorio je,
and I start reading.
počeo sam da čitam.
Okay, Lord, let typology come from the Bible.
I rekao sam, Gospode, nek tipologija proizađe iz Biblije, izađe iz Biblije.
But the Bible does not have voice that comes out and says, I am a type, I am a type,
Ali
I am a
Biblija
type.
nema taj glas da počne da viče, ja sam tip, ja sam tip.
So how will I recognize typology when I see
Kako
it
ću
in
ja
the
da
Bible?
prepoznam tipologiju kad je vidim?
This was my frustration as I tried to get a handle on doing this
To je
topic.
bila frustracija dok sam pokušao da pronađem.
I have only heard a voice a couple of times in my life, a voice speaking to me
Nekoliko-
from God.
Nekoliko puta sam ja čuo glas od Boga.
Because I don't believe in usually following voices. Just whenever
Ja-
you hear a voice, you follow a voice.
Ja ne vjerujem uvek da treba pratiti, čim čujete neki glas, da ga sledite.
Because this is the voice we need to follow, the
Ovo
scriptures
je,
rather than
ovo je
these
glas
voices.
koji treba da sledimo, pismo.
But one time,
Ali jednom
when I was about 12,
sam 12 godina,
I was hiking on a mountain, the highest mountain in the United States,
planinario sam na najvećoj planini u
before
Americi,
Alaska was added to our states.
pre nego što je Aljaska dodata Sjedinjenim državama.
And I found myself, I won't tell the whole story, it's too embarrassing.
Rekao sam sebi, neću celu priču, pričam, posramit ću se.
Found myself on top of the mountain at sunset, on top of this 14,000 foot mountain.
Pri zalasku sunca popeo sam se na planinu koja je otprilike 4.500 metara visoka.
Myself and 2 other friends.
Ja i još 2 prijatelja.
And no flashlight,
Nema svetla,
no coat, no jacket,
nema kaputa, jakne,
and no place to light a fire.
nema nigde mesta da se zapali vatra.
We would definitely die that night if we stayed on top.
Dakle, ako ostanemo na vrhu, definitivno ćemo umreti te noći.
So we started running down the trail.
Tako
very
da smo
fast.
brzo niz stazu trčali dole.
About halfway down, it got so dark we could not see any further.
Na polovini već toliko je bio mrak, nismo mogli više
And I
vidjeti.
crashed into a rock and cut open my leg. I still have the scar from the big gash that I got in my
Udario
leg.
sam se u kamen, noga se otvorila, još uvijek imam ožiljak od toga.
So then I slowed down and I started walking on what I thought was the trail.
A onda sam usporio i hodao onim zašto sam smatrao da je staza.
And then I heard this voice.
A onda sam čuo taj glas.
Inaudible voice to anyone else,
Nije bio čujan glas,
but just pounded into my head.
ali je u glavi bio snažan, udarao je u glavu.
Get down on your hands and knees and crawl.
Brzo dole i puzi.
So I got down on my hands and knees
Ja sam sišao na noge i
and I
ruke
took one step with my hand.
i učinio jedan pokret rukom ovako.
And there was nothing there.
I ništa ispod.
I looked down.
Ja sam pogledao
And
dole,
about 200 feet directly below me was the camp where we were camped.
a dole oko skoro 80 metara duboko vidim kamp naš.
If I had taken one more step, I would have been back to camp very quickly.
Da sam samo jedan korak učinio, već bi bio u kampu brzo.
But I wouldn't have been alive to tell the story.
Ne bi bio živ da vam sad pričam priču.
So God sent a voice when this very disobedient little boy needed help.
Bog je tako svojim glasom pomogao ovom mladom dečku.
Well, as a doctoral student, desperate to find out about typology, God knew I needed help again.
Kao doktorski student, očajan da nađem tipologiju, Bog je znao da mi je opet potreban.
And so while I was praying very earnestly one day to try to understand how to grasp typology from the Bible,
I dok sam se molio jednog dana, onako baš usrdno, da pronađem tipologiju iz Biblije,
there was another voice pounding in my head.
ponovo glas koji mi je snažno govorio u glavi.
Now this is the most embarrassing part of the story.
A ovo je u stvari deo koji je sramotan u priči.
Because I teach Old Testament,
Jer ja predajem Stari Zavet.
and the voice should have come in Hebrew,
I glas bi trebalo da je došao na jevrejskom.
or at least in English.
U najmanju ruku na engleskom.
Even Serbian would have been okay.
Čak i srpski bi bio u redu.
But it came in Greek,
Ali došao je na grčkom.
a Greek word,
Grčka
boom,
reč
into my head.
u glavi.
Tupos.
Tipos.
Tupos.
Tipos.
The Greek word from the New Testament.
Grčka reč iz Novog Zaveta.
And then I began to go back to the Bible and look at this word, tupos.
I onda sam išao u Bibliju da pronađem šta znači tipos.
And I found that 5 passages in the Bible used this word to describe the way the New Testament interpreted the Old Testament.
5 puta se spominje ova reč u Novom Zavetu i predstavlja način interpretacije Starog Zaveta od strane novozavetnih autora.
Here was a key that I had been looking for about 6 months total.
Ključ koji sam tražio 6 mjeseci sam pronašao.
I did not have to define what typology was,
Nisam morao da definišem šta je tipologija.
because the Bible writer had labeled these 5 things: tupos, 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 type,
Jer su
type.
biblijski autori dali sami naslov tome. Tipos, tipos, tip.
And these 5 passages are the following:
To su sljedećih 5 odlomaka Biblije.
Romans 5:14,
Rimljanima 5:14,
1 Corinthians 10 verses 6 and 11,
1 Korinćanima 10, 6 i 11,
1 Peter 3:21,
1 Petrova 3:21,
Hebrews 8 verse 5,
Jevrejima 8:5,
and Hebrews 9:24.
Jevrejima 9:24.
In Romans 5:14,
U Rimljanima 5:14,
Adam
Adam
is a tupos
je tipos
of Christ.
Hrista.
In 1 Corinthians 10,
1 Korinćanima 10,
the Exodus
izlazak
are tupoi, plural, tupoi of the
je
church.
množina tipoi crkve.
1 Peter 3,
1 Petrova 3:21,
we have the word antitupos.
imamo reč antitipos.
Everyone here has had Greek, right?
Svi ovdje su imali grčki, zar ne?
Okay. Anyone has not had Greek?
Nije još neko imao?
All right, good.
Da, the first year is just beginning.
Okay, but they can read the letters. So,
Yes,
yes, all right.
možete makar slova prva godina da čita.
Okay. And here is the 1 Peter 3, the
1 Petrova 3,
blood, the flood
potop
is the type,
je tip,
and baptism is the antitype.
a krštenje je antitip.
And then in Hebrews 8:5
A u Jevrejima 8:5
and 9:24, it's the sanctuary.
to je svetinja. Ova dva teksta posljednja je svetinja tipos.
8:5 uses tupos, and 9:24 uses antitupos.
Prvi tekst koristi tipos, a drugi antitipos.
Let's first stop a moment and look at the word antitupos. I want to make sure we don't misunderstand that word.
Da prvo shvatimo šta je antitipos, da ne pogrešno ne razumemo tu reč.
What does anti mean?
Šta znači anti? Instead of.
Okay, yes. Antichrist instead of Christ.
Da, umjesto Hrista.
Sometimes it means against.
I protiv, znači i protiv.
But the most common meaning is neither of those in the New
Ali
Testament.
najučestalije značenje nije ova dva u Novom
It's a
Zavetu.
related
Nijedno
meaning,
od
but it's related, but not exactly those two things.
Nisu te dve stvari u pitanju.
Most often it means corresponding to.
Anti znači nešto što odgovara nečem, podudarno s nečim.
So the antitype is, yes, in place of the type.
Da, antitip jeste umjesto tipa,
But
na mesto tipa,
more specifically, it corresponds to the type.
ali još specifičnije, on odgovara tipu, podudaran s tipom.
Well, I spent about a year doing exegesis of these 5 passages.
Godinu dana sam ovih 5 poglavlja vršio egzigezu njihovu.
And 396 pages later,
I 396 stranica posle toga, kasnije,
actually 496 pages later,
496 stranica kasnije,
I came to my conclusions.
došao sam do zaključaka.
And I was delighted to see that from each of these 5 passages, the same characteristics of typology emerged.
Shvatio sam da iz svih ovih 5 poglavlja isti principi tipologije proizilaze.
And I found that the nature of typology that came from these passages was the same that our Adventist pioneers understood when they were building up the sanctuary doctrine.
A principi koji proizilaze iz ove tipologije su isti kao principi pionira adventizma koji su gradili učenje o svetinji.
A type was not just some retrospective recognition of similar situations.
Tip, dakle, nije bio samo retrospektivno posmatranje slične situacije.
A type was, and now let me give you a definition of a type
Sad ću vam dati definiciju tipa,
that emerged from these 5
koja
passages.
proizilazi iz ovih 5 poglavlja.
I'm going to spare you those 400 pages of exegesis,
Poštedjet ću vas tih 400 strana egzigeze.
but I'm happy for you to check my exegesis if you don't trust my conclusions.
Ako ne verujete mojim zaključcima, možete i provjeriti moju egzigezu.
This has been published as a dissertation in the dissertation series of Andrews University. So,
Have you brought that with you?
you know, I should have. Maybe you have? You have a copy? Okay, you have a copy.
Znači imamo
Ja.
to u biblioteci, njegovu disertaciju.
It's very boring reading
Veoma je dosadno to da se čita.
because dissertations you write only for your committee so that you can gain your degree.
Disertaciju vi pišete za komisiju, ne pišete za...
And you learn to write a special kind of writing.
I učite da pišete specijalno.
I call it a disease that you get.
Ja to zovem bolešću koju dobije.
And the disease has a name. It's dissertationese.
A bolest se zove disertaciona bolest. Ili...
I wrote my first chapter without the disease.
Prvo poglavlje sam napisao bez te bolesti.
And Dr. Hazel read it, and
Hazel je pročitao.
he put so many red marks that
Toliko je crvenog bilo.
it looked like the page was bleeding.
Kao da krvari stranice, koliko je crvenih.
And he taught me how to write with this formal, boring style of dissertationese.
On me naučio kako da pišem taj formalni, dosadni jezik disertacije.
And long sentences and difficult words.
Rečenice i teške reči.
And when I was done with my dissertation, he
Kad
gave
sam
me a
završio
very
disertaciju,
good compliment.
dao mi je kompliment jedan lep.
He said, "You write longer sentences than the Germans do."
Ti pišeš duže rečenice od Nemaca.
I had one sentence that was a whole page long,
A jedna rečenica je bila na celoj stranici. Jedna.
where I was summarizing the definition of typology.
Tu sam sumirao u stvari definiciju tipologije.
And I've been spending the rest of my life trying to get over this disease.
I ceo život ja pokušam da se izlečim sad od te bolesti.
So if you read that dissertation,
Ako čitate tu disertaciju,
you know that it's written by a person with a sickness.
vidjet ćete da je to bolesna osoba pisala.
Okay.
Pa kako, jesam dobro preveo? Because the sick person in our language can be in a sick...
Oh, a sick mind. That's also true, yes.
Ima tu istine.
In fact, you notice, I write with my left hand.
U stvari, pisao sam levom rukom.
And I was a student missionary, as a college student, I was a student missionary in Hong Kong.
A bio sam misionar u Hong Kongu isto.
And in those days, no one wrote with their left hand.
A u to vreme niko nije levom rukom pisao.
And so when I picked up the chalk the first day and I started writing on the board,
Kad sam pisao na tabli,
the whole class started laughing.
ceo razred se smejao.
And I said, what is wrong?
Ja sam pitao šta nije u redu.
I looked to see if maybe something was wrong on my body.
Ja sam
here.
mislio nešto na telu nije kako treba nešto.
And one of the students told me, if you write with your left hand here in Hong Kong,
Jedan student mi rekao, ako pišeš levom rukom u Hong Kongu,
you are either stupid or crazy.
ili si lud, dakle glupav ili si lud.
So we spent the rest of the year trying to decide which one I was, stupid or crazy. So,
I onda smo cijelu godinu razmišljali šta sam ja, glupav ili lud.
so sick mind, yes, maybe so. Okay.
Tako da može biti i bolestan u ovom smislu.
Definition of typology, yes.
Definicija tipologije, da.
I will try to shorten it from one page to one shorter sentence.
Sa jedne stranice ja ću vam to sumirati na jednu kratku rečenicu.
I found that a type is
Tip je
a person,
osoba,
like Adam,
kao Adam,
or an event,
događaj,
like the Exodus or the flood,
kao potop ili izlazak,
or an institution, like the sanctuary.
ili kao institucija, građevina, kao svetinja.
So a person, event, or institution
Osoba, događaj ili institucija
which God has divinely designed
koju je Bog božanskim proviđenjem namenio, dizajnirao
to prefigure, to point forward to
da ukazuje na budućnost,
the eschatological fulfillment
eshatološko ispunjenje
in Christ
u Hristu
or the gospel realities brought about by Christ.
ili u stvarnosti evanđelja koje dolaze kroz Hrista.
One more time.
Može još
Person,
jednom?
event, or institution
Osoba, događaj ili institucija
which God has divinely designed
koje je Bog božanskom silom proviđenjem
to prefigure, point
namenio
forward
da
to
ukazuje na budućnost,
the eschatological fulfillment in Christ
na eshatološko ispunjenje u Hristu
or the gospel realities brought about by
ili
Christ.
evanđelske realnosti, stvarnosti koje je Hristos doneo sa sobom.
And that was the definition that emerged from each one of these passages.
To je definicija koja proizilazi iz svake od ovih odlomaka.
But even that you say may be too long to teach to your church members.
A možda je i ovo predugo da učite vernike, ovu definiciju.
You see, I'm trying hard to get over my sick mind, my dissertationese.
Trudio sam se da prevaziđem svoju bolest, disertacionu
So
bolest.
let me try to make it easier.
Evo da vam uprostim.
Have you ever met a tupas?
Da li ste ikad susreli tipa? Sreli ga? Upoznali ga?
May I introduce you to a tupas?
Hoću da vas upoznam sa tiposom.
I
Sa
brought
tipom.
my friend Mr. Tupas with me.
Doneo sam prijatelja gospodina Tiposa.
Are you okay in there?
Si dobro? Si okej?
Here he is.
Evo ga.
Good buddy.
Drugar naš.
Meet Mr. Tupas.
Upoznajte gospodina Tiposa. U redu je.
Okay. The old Chinese proverb says a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Dakle, kineska poslovica, jedna slika 1000 reči.
I find it interesting. I teach this class in the doctrine of the sanctuary.
Ja predajem ovaj predmet, doktrinu
And
svetinje,
I've taught it for almost 20 years now at the seminary.
oko 20.
Almost.
Almost.
Between 15 and 20.
Blizu
15, 16 years.
20 godina već podučam. Između
For a
15
few
i 20.
years, I only taught one part of the course.
Nekoliko godina podučavao sam samo jedan deo ove
And
doktrine.
for 15, I've been the coordinator of the whole course. So
15 godina ja sam koordinator celog
And
cijele
most of the
doktrine.
time, students don't remember anything I said in the course
Obično studenti ništa ne zapamte na
when I
predaji.
meet them 10 years later.
Kad ih 10 godina sretnem kasnije.
But they always remember Mr. Tupas.
A uvek se sete gospodina Tiposa.
A picture's worth 1,000 words.
Dakle, slika 1000 reči.
Why do I say this is a Tupas?
Zašto ja uopšte kažem da je ovo Tipos?
Because in Greek, the
Grčkom.
word Tupas literally means
Reč Tipos doslovno u grčkom znači prazno, prazni kalup, prazan kalup.
and that's what this is.
To je
It's
to.
a hollow mold.
To je prazan kalup.
When Joanne and I were married
Kad smo
a
se-
couple years ago or so,
Kad smo se Joanne i ja uzeli pre par godina,
it seems like only yesterday,
kao da je bilo juče.
we had a lady who was a relative of Joanne's that catered our wedding reception.
Imali smo gospođu koja je vodila našu ceremoniju venčanja.
She was a very sophisticated lady,
Sofisticirana je bila gospođa.
and
kultivisana.
she catered weddings all over the United States.
Dakle, ona je organizovala svadbe po celoj Americi.
And when you sat down at the table, there were more forks and more spoons than you knew what to do with.
Sednete za sto, ne znate šta ćete sa tolikim viljuškama i kaškama.
And so we had a wonderful reception.
Predivan prijem smo imali.
But we're not that kind of people. We're not sophisticated people.
Ali mi nismo takav tip ljudi, sofisticirani.
And so 1 year later, when she sent us a present for our first anniversary,
Kad nam je za mladence htjela da pošalje poklon,
we opened up the box, and here was Mr.
a
Tupas.
otvorili smo kutiju, a ono gospodin Tipos.
And Joanne and I said, "What is that?"
A Joanne i ja smo rekli, šta je sad ovo?
So we read the instructions,
Uputstvo smo pročitali.
and it described it as an ice sculpture.
To je u stvari ledena skulptura.
You can see this is the shape of a penguin.
Vidite, to pingvin.
And so the instructions said to turn the penguin
Uputstvo.
mold over,
Kaže, kalup okrenuti za 180 stepeni,
fill it with distilled water,
napuniti destilovanom vodom,
put it in your freezer,
staviti u frižider
and then when it's time for your sophisticated party,
i kad je vreme za tu sofisticiranu proslavu,
take it out of the freezer,
izvući,
peel back the plastic,
odviti plastiku
and out comes this gleaming ice sculpture.
i ono izlazi ta sjajna ledena skulptura.
And you put it in the punch bowl,
Stavite u posudu s punčom
and you have a very festive party.
i onda imate jednu proslavu, predivnu proslavu.
Well, we thought we'd try it.
Mi smo probali to.
But you know that I told you I tend to be a utilitarian, don't waste anything.
Rekao sam da ja imam sklonost ka utilitarizmu, ne sme
So I
ništa
said-
da se potroši.
I don't want to buy a whole big bottle of distilled water. That will be a waste of money.
Ma gde da kupujem da trošim pare na destilovanu vodu? Ovoliko.
And so I just poured in regular water,
Tako da sam ja običnu vodu nasuo.
put it in the freezer.
Stavio u frižider,
And our party came.
došla proslava,
I pulled this back,
ja odvio ovo,
pulled out the sculpture,
izašla skulptura
and it fell apart in
i
1,000
raspala
pieces.
se u 1000 delova.
Oh, I ruined the party.
Uništio proslavu.
So the next time I bought some distilled water
Sljedeći put sam kupio destilovanu
and
vodu.
did it right this time,
Ovaj put sam kako treba uradio.
and there was this beautiful ice penguin in our
A
punch bowl.
tu je bio u posudi za punč taj predivni, sjajni pingvin.
Now I must confess, we've only used it once
Moram da priznam da smo ovo samo jednom upotrebili.
as a mold.
Kao kalup.
For the rest of the time, I've been using it to
Ostatak-
tell about typology.
Vremena ja ovo koristim za nastavu, za tipologiju.
Because I believe if you understand the characteristics of this hollow penguin, you will understand the characteristics of Bible typology.
Jer ako razumete osnovne osobine ovog praznog pingvina, razumećete i tipologiju.
You know, I believe in chiastic structures, and when I'm not in the center, it seems...
Ja verujem u hijastičke strukture, kad nisam u centru, to je problem.
Okay. Let's look at the characteristics of this.
Ajde da pogledamo osobine ovog
The first characteristic is that
Prva osobina,
it is a tangible reality.
to je opipljiva realnost.
It's not just a figment of my imagination,
To nije stvar imaginacije, mašte.
right?
Jel to tako?
Yes, it's real? Okay.
Stvarno je. Dakle,
Touch it, you can feel it.
možete da osjetiš to je stvarno nešto.
It's not just imagination.
Nije to neka samo mašta.
And if I had the ice sculpture, I could throw that at you and you would know that was real
Kad
too.
bi skulpturu ledeno imao i ti bi znao da je to, kad bi bacio, znao bi da je to stvarno.
Both type and antitype are real.
I vidite, i tip i antitip su stvarni.
Not just imagination, not just
Nisu samo
abstraction.
stvar mašte, abstrakcije.
And so Adam was a real person.
Adam je tako bio stvarna osoba.
According to the biblical writers, the Exodus really happened.
Prema biblijskim autorima, izlazak se zaista
And the
dogodio.
flood really happened.
I potom se stvarno
And
desio.
the sanctuary really existed back there.
I stvarno je postojala svetinja.
And just as there was a real sanctuary in the Old Testament,
Kao što je postojala stvarna svetinja u Starom Zavetu,
so the antitype is real.
tako i antitip stvaran.
If I had no other reason to believe in a real heavenly sanctuary, it would be because God calls this relationship type-antitype.
Kad ne bi bio nijedan drugi razlog zbog čega bi verovao u nebesku svetinju, onda je to zbog ove veze između tipa i antitipa.
Now I would take a half hour to elaborate on that in Czech Republic, where many don't believe in a real heavenly
Za ovo mi je u
sanctuary.
Češkoj trebalo pola sata jer mnogi ne veruju u nebesku svetinju.
But I think we don't have that problem here, so I won't
Mislim da mi nemamo taj problem
try
ovdje.
to convince you if you already believe.
Ako već verujete, što da vas ubeđujemo to?
So that's the first characteristic.
To je
that
prva osobina.
the type and the antitype are historical realities,
Tip i antitip su istorijske realnosti.
spatio-temporal realities.
Prostor i vremena.
What is the second characteristic?
A druga osobina?
Is this hollow mold the original?
Da li je ovaj prazni kalup original?
Is it?
Da li je? Da li je to original?
Or was it shaped from some other original?
Ili je on oblikovan po nekom drugom originalu?
The original was the penguin itself, right? The real penguin.
Original je stvarni pingvin.
That this was designed after.
Ovo je stvoreno po uzoru pingvina.
And then this was probably liquid that was poured into another mold and then it shaped this.
A ova plastika je bila tečnost i sipana je u neki drugi kalup da bi se dobio ovaj oblik.
Or at least, if you think of other kinds of hollow molds,
Ako razmišljate o drugim praznim kalupima,
at least it was shaped by a designer who had a design in his mind.
u najmanju ruku to je oblikovano po onome što je u umu dizajnera.
This just didn't happen.
Ovo se nije samo tako dogodilo.
There was a design that caused this to happen.
Postoje neki dizajn koji je bio uzrok ovog.
And so types in the Old Testament are not just things that accidentally correspond to Jesus.
Tipovi u Starom Zavetu tako nisu nešto što slučajno odgovara Isusu.
They are certain persons and certain events and certain
To su određeni događaji, određene ličnosti
which God has divinely designed, specifically designed
koje je Bog specifično stvorio,
to function
dizajnirao,
as types.
da igraju funkciju tipa. Da imaju funkciju tipa.
Okay, so second characteristic is there is a previous design, a divine design.
Druga
typology.
osobina je da je to prethodno dizajnirano, da je Bog učestvovao u tome.
Third characteristic of my little penguin here
Treća osobina mog pingvina malog ovde
is what is the function of this mold?
koja je funkcija ovog kalupa?
What does a mold do?
Šta kalup čini? Šta je uloga kalupa?
It shapes, right? It shapes
On
what you put inside.
oblikuje ono što unutra sipate.
It shapes the end product. that
Oblikuje krajnji proizvod koji izlazi.
And if you look at my penguin here, you can already know what the basic shape of the end product will be.
I ako pogledate ovog mog malog pingvina, već znate koji će biti krajnji proizvod, kako izgleda.
So it's it's basically predictive.
On u stvari proriče, vidite, imate predikcioni element.
It predetermines what the antitype will
On
be like.
predodređuje kakav će antitip biti.
So in the same way,
Na isti način,
Old Testament type predictively points forward to the antitype.
starozavetni tip u stvari proročki ukazuje na kakav će biti antitip.
It prefigures.
Prefiguriše, mi imamo tu reč dobro. Prefiguriše, dakle.
That would be a third characteristic.
To je treća osobina.
It's not just retrospective, not just looking back.
Nije samo retrospektivno prošlost.
I don't just look at the ice sculpture and then say, well,
Ja ne
okay,
pogledam u ledenu figuru i kažem,
then I will understand what the plastic penguin looks like.
sad ću da razumem na osnovu toga kako izgleda plastični pingvin.
No, you start with this first, and
Sa ovim prvo
it
počinjete.
helps you to see what will come out of this.
To vam pomaže da shvatite šta će proizaći iz toga.
So it has a predictive function. Do you see the point that I'm
Postoji
trying to
predikcioni, dakle, proročki element.
make? Okay.
Predviđanja, prediction.
Fourth characteristic,
Četvrta osobina.
and that is that the antitype, the end product, corresponds in its basic contours to the type.
A to je da krajnji produkt u svojim osnovnim konturama odgovara tipu.
Now, what would happen,
Šta bi se dogodilo?
what would you think, let's say,
Šta biste vi pomislili?
if I filled this with distilled water,
Kad bih ja ovo napunio destilovanom vodom,
put it in my freezer,
stavio u frižider,
took it out for the party, and rolled it back,
izvadio za slavlje i odvio,
and there came out of this a beautiful white ice frog.
a ono iz ovog izađe lepa, sjajna žaba, ledena žaba.
Can that happen?
Može li to da se dogodi?
No, because the end product is going to be shaped by the basic contours of the type.
Jer krajnji proizvod mora biti po obliku osnovnih kontura oblika tipa.
And if you look at the basic shape of this, then you can know basically the basic contours of the antitype.
Ako pogledate osnovne konture tipa, onda znate otprilike antitip kako će izgledati, njegove osnovne konture.
And often in the book of Hebrews, this is exactly what the author of Hebrews says.
Obično je to i namera autora Ebrejima poslanici.
Hebrews 8 and verse 3.
8.3.
The author says, the priest offered sacrifices in the Old Testament times.
Autor kaže da je sveštenik u tom stihu prinosio žrtve u starom zavetu.
Therefore, it is necessary
I onda kaže, zato valja u
that
našem
Christ
prevodu,
also have something to offer.
valja, odnosno neophodno je da i Hristos nešto prinese.
And he uses this word ananke,
I koristi reč ananke,
which means
koja znači
necessity.
neophodnost.
Again in Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 23 and 24.
Jevrejima 9, 23, 24.
The author argues from the type to the necessity that it also happens in the antitype.
Autor razmišlja od tipa prema neophodnosti antitipa.
Just as the earthly sanctuary was cleansed,
Kao što je zemaljska svetinja bila čišćena,
so ananke,
tako ananke,
necessity,
neophodnost,
that the heavenly sanctuary be cleansed.
da se i nebeska očisti.
Here we have the author recognizing this quality of this characteristic that I've been describing here,
Autor prepoznao je kvalitete ove koje smo opisali.
that the contours of the type and the antitype are basically the same.
Da su konture tipa i antitipa faktički iste.
Jesus is recorded, he said it probably in Aramaic, but it's recorded in Greek.
On je rekao na aramejskom, zapisano na grčkom, Isus,
Oftentimes you have Jesus saying, thus I must do this because thus it is necessary that I fulfill what was spoken by the
Isus
prophet.
obično kaže, ovo valja da se ispuni, mora se ispuniti.
Do you remember what that word was, that Greek word that he uses for necessary?
Sećate se grčke reči za neophodno, mora da se ispuni, koji Isus spominje? Dei.
Jesus often is recognizing that he is pouring his life into the Old Testament molds that shape him.
Isus u stvari je svoj život stavio u starozavetni kalup.
This is one of the greatest reasons why I believe in Jesus as the Messiah.
To je jedan od najvećih razloga što ja verujem da je Isus Mesija.
Because no ordinary human being
Ne može obično ljudsko biće
could pour his life into the Adam mold,
da stavi svoj život u Adamov kalup,
in the Moses mold,
Mojsijev kalup,
the Exodus mold,
druge Mojsijeve kalup
and all the other types of the Old Testament.
i sve druge tipove Starog Zaveta.
And Jesus could fulfill all of those in one person.
A Isus je u jednoj osobi sve ispunio.
The greatest genius in the world could never do that.
Najveći genij na ovom svetu ne bi mogao to da ispuni.
Only Jesus could pull this off as a divine human being.
A on je to mogao jer je bio božanski čovjek.
So that's the fourth characteristic.
To je četvrta osobina. Dakle.
And then the final one
A posljednja je
is that the end product, the antitype,
da krajnji produkt, proizvod,
transcends the type
prevazilazi tip u stvari.
in fulfilling the ultimate purpose for which this type was made.
Ispunjavajući konačnu svrhu za koju je uopšte tip načinjen.
Or, in other words,
Drugim
the
rečima,
antitype is greater than the type.
antitip je veći od tipa.
So what do you think my wife would say?
Šta mislite šta bi moja žena rekla?
You'll be able to figure that out better next week when you know her better.
Sljedeće sedmice ćete to bolje shvatiti kad nju upoznate.
If I told her
Kad bih joj
that I
rekao
was too lazy to buy the distilled water and to put this in the freezer.
da sam bio lenj da kupim destilovanu vodu i da stavim u frižider.
And so this time for this party,
I za ovo slavlje
let me just put the plastic mold there in the punch bowl.
stavit ću plastični kalup samo u
Isn't that pretty?
činiju sa punčom.
Joanne?
Joanne, zar nije prelepo ovo?
She would say, no, it's
Ona bi rekla,
horrible.
ne, užas.
This is not made to go in the punch
To
bowl.
nije načinjeno da stoji u punču.
We need something greater than this.
Treba nam veće nešto od ovoga.
We need to put the ice there like it was intended.
Treba nam led.
And so the earthly type is not exactly the same as the heavenly.
Zemaljski tip, dakle,
antitype.
nije isti kao antitip nebeski.
The heavenly sanctuary is greater than the earthly sanctuary.
Tako je nebeska svetinja veća od zemaljske.
We've already talked about that earlier this course.
Pričali smo o tome na početku ovog predmeta.
Jesus in Matthew 12 says this 3 times
Isus u Mateju 12 3 puta je kazao.
when he says, a greater than Jonah is
Ovdje
here.
je veći od Jone.
A greater than the temple is
Ovdje je
here.
veći od hrama.
A greater than Solomon is
Ovdje je
here.
veći od Solomona.
Jesus is the greater prophet, priest, and king.
On je veći sveštenik, prorok i car.
That in a brief nutshell, or penguin shell, is the essence of typology.
To je ukratko u orahovoj ljusci ili u pingvinovoj ljusci suština tipologije.
Any questions about what we've said so far?
Pitanja na ono što smo do sada kazali.
Thank you for letting me finish that one round. Now let's take a 10-minute
Hvala
break.
vam što ste mi dopustili da završim do kraja, a sad imamo 10 minuta pauzu.